So chapter 9 is on categorical syllogisms. Does anyone know what a syllogism is?
Is it an argument with two propositions?
Not quite. It's an argument with two premises. Yes. Now, why, given that an argument can have any number of premises from 1 to infinity, why is there a special name for an argument with two premises? Well, the answer is that the Greeks thought just about any argument of merit could be phrased as a syllogism. Aristotle wrote a lot about syllogisms, and consequently a lot of medieval philosophy focuses on syllogisms too. And it turns out there are an awful lot of arguments that can be expressed in two premises. Not everyone, and we certainly don't sort of obsess about syllogisms these days, but there are a lot of syllogisms, so that's why there's a name for it. Now, I corrected Ethan, sorry, I corrected myself. I corrected Ethan when he said an argument with two propositions. Why? Because a syllogism has how many propositions? Three. It has two premises and a conclusion. So every syllogism has three propositions in it. Every categorical syllogism has three categorical propositions in it. Okay, that's what a categorical syllogism is. Three categorical propositions. In theory, how many different terms could there be in a categorical syllogism then? A little bit of multiplication. How many terms in each proposition? 2. The subject and the predicate, right? Those are the terms. So how many different terms could there be in a categorical syllogism? 6. Let's imagine a categorical syllogism with 6 different terms. All oranges are fruit, no whales are reptiles, therefore all chihuahuas are dogs. What's wrong with that? It makes no sense. What do you mean? It doesn't go anywhere. Yeah. And what's the point of an argument?
To reach its conclusion.
In other words, to support the conclusion with the premises. Why doesn't that happen in the example that I gave? They're not related to each other. There's no relevance. So if you have 6 different terms, they're going to be totally independent of each other. All right. Let's work out how many different terms there are in fact in each categorical syllogism by coming up with an example. Here is a very simple example. All chihuahuas, I'm inordinately proud of the fact that I can spell chihuahuas, are dogs. All dogs are mammals. A lot of them talk about mammals in this class. Now, you tell me the conclusion.
All chihuahuas are mammals.
All chihuahuas are mammals. Who agrees? Wait a minute. How can you give me the conclusion? I'm telling you the argument. How is it you knew what the conclusion was in advance?
Because they're directly related to each other.
Yes. In fact, this is what's called a valid argument. What is the definition of validity? Yeah.
The premises can't prove. If the premises are true, then the conclusion must be true.
Yeah, or the premises guarantee the conclusion. Yes. Now, as will become very clear in this chapter, the reason why the premises of a valid argument guarantee the conclusion is the same reason why you were able to give me the conclusion when I just gave you the premises. The answer is that the information in the conclusion is contained in the premises. So in other words, the conclusion is just restating what's already there. That's why, if the premises were true, the conclusion would have to be true, because it's already true. You made the premises true, and the information is in the premises. So that's the feature of a valid argument. Now, I said a little bit about the difference between deductive logic, which is what this class focuses on, and inductive arguments. In inductive arguments, it's never a valid argument. You know, inductive arguments are things like I said, 8 out of 10 dentists prefer this toothpaste, therefore my dentist will prefer this toothpaste. The premises never guarantee the conclusion because the conclusion actually goes beyond the information of the premises. So inductive arguments are actually kind of useful because you're learning new stuff, but their usefulness comes at a cost of risk. Whereas deductive arguments, the conclusions are just restating what's already there in the premises. The only reason they're useful is because sometimes it's not obvious that that information is contained within the premises. But in a valid argument, it always will be. All right. This is an example of a valid categorical syllogism. How many different terms are there?
6.
Well, there are 6 terms, but they're not all different.
3.
3. What are they?
Chihuahuas, dogs, and mice.
Chihuahuas, dogs, and mammals. Yes, there are 3 categories. All right. These categories are given, well, they're labeled, first of all, with letters. Chihuahuas in this case is S, mammals in this case is P. Now, this is the case even if Chihuahuas were the predicate of the premise in which it occurs, which sometimes happens. So S simply means whatever is the subject of the conclusion. Which is why when you're trying to evaluate a categorical syllogism, bless you, you need to identify the conclusion first. When you identify the conclusion, it will tell you what S is. We have a name for S. It's the subject of the conclusion, but it's not the subject necessarily of the premise. So we don't just call it subject, we call it the minor term. The minor term of the categorical syllogism. P we call the major term. And again, it is whatever is the predicate of the conclusion. It's not necessarily the predicate of the premise it'll show up in. The third term, where does the third term show up? What's that?
S and P. Like dogs.
No, it's not in S. It's not in P. It's distinct from S and P.
It shows up in both premises.
It shows up in both premises, but not the conclusion. So S shows up in the conclusion and one premise. P shows up in the conclusion and the other premise. The third term, which we call M for middle term, shows up in each premise, but not in the conclusion. And the middle term sort of establishes a link. If you notice, the conclusion is about something that is mentioned in one premise and something that is mentioned in another premise. Neither one of these by itself mentions both the things. So neither one of these by itself can guarantee the conclusion. In fact, if we diagrammed it, we would have, it would look like this. Because the premises are what kind of premises? Dependent. They rely on each other. That's right. Because this one talks about chihuahuas, but it doesn't talk about mammals. This one talks about mammals, but it doesn't talk about chihuahuas. It's only when you put them together that you can connect chihuahuas to mammals. And what is it that provides the link between the chihuahuas and the mammals? The middle term, the dogs. So the middle term is what provides the link, which is why it's in both premises. Okay. Now, when you write out a category, well actually, before I go any further, open your book to page 238. Okay, look at practice quiz 9.1b. Jamie, Could you read the first one of practice quiz 9.1b?
No Greek poet was a genius because no Greek poet was eccentric, and geniuses are eccentric.
Right there we have the example of a categorical syllogism. It's got 3 categorical propositions. Now, what you're being asked to do in that is to put the argument into what is called standard form for categorical syllogisms. We've already seen that there is a standard form for categorical propositions. That is one of the 4 types. So for example, suppose I were to say that REM song, Everybody Hurts. That is a categorical proposition. Of what type? Give me a vowel. A. So if you were to put it in standard form, you would have to start with the word
All.
all. So all what? People, because it's everybody. And then the next word would have to be are. All people are
Things that hurt.
things that hurt. Yes. Good thing they didn't sing that. It's not half as good. Okay, so that's an example of taking a categorical proposition that is not in standard form and putting it into standard form. You have to do the same for categorical syllogisms. Now, the first stage is to put all of the categorical propositions into standard form for categorical propositions. One of these is obviously, well actually you're going to need things for one of them, but what about, which of these is not in standard form, is most obviously not in standard form?
People who are geniuses are people who
Well,
are
geniuses are eccentric. Now you don't need the people. What do you need to add? Well, that's true, but what type is it? It's an A type, so you need to specify all. That's right. So you'd have to say all geniuses are either eccentrics, because eccentrics is a collective noun, or eccentric things, if you treat it as an adjective. Okay, so you would have to do that. But once we've gone past that, you write them out in a special order. And the special order goes like this. Major premise. Now, I haven't explained what the major premise is yet, but I will. Minor premise, and then you draw a line underneath the premises and you write the conclusion. Now, quick quiz. See if you can work it out. Is this argument, the one about chihuahuas, is it in the right order?
Yeah.
See if you can work it out. No, it's not in the right order. Why not, and how can you tell?
Because the major premise is not on the top.
How do you know that this is the major premise?
Because the conclusion is the P, the major term is not.
That's right. So in other words, what you've worked out is that the major premise is the premise that contains
The major term.
the major term. Yes, because each premise, this premise contains the major term and the middle term, and this premise contains the minor term and the middle term. So this is the major premise. So to write it in standard form, I would have to put this first. All dogs are mammals. Once I've done that, it is in the right order. One more thing, though, to put this into standard form, I'm going to ask you to separate the content and the form. What is the content of an argument?
The propositions that are proposed as an idea in it, rather than the form, the shape of the argument.
Well, but the propositions actually have a logical structure too. What type they are is their logical structure. Answer what the terms are about. So, for example, the content of this would be dogs, chihuahuas, and mammals. So, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that over here, and I'm going to say S is chihuahuas. And so I'm going to replace all occurrences of the word chihuahuas with the letter S. P is,
Mammals.
what was that again?
Mammals.
Mammals, right? And then I'm going to replace all occurrences of the word mammals with the letter P. And finally, M is
Dogs.
dogs, and ditto. I'm going to put M's. Now you've got a nice separation. The logical form, you can have any number of categorical syllogisms that could have this form. They could be about albatrosses, they could be about computers, they could be about sports teams, but they would all have the same logical form. It's the form and the form alone that tells you whether or not an argument is valid. What it's actually about doesn't matter. So it's nice to be able to separate them. So if I ask you to put them in standard form, I'm going to ask you to do something like this. Let's try that with the Greek poets one. What is the very first and most important thing that you have to do then? Identify what? The conclusion. Yes. What is the conclusion in this case? No Greek poet was a genius, says Zach. Who agrees? How do you know that's the conclusion?
Immediately followed by the word because, an indicator.
That's right. It's followed by the word because, which is an indicator for a premise. What comes after because is a premise, which gives you a clue that what comes before it is the conclusion. All right. So that tells us that the conclusion is what type? A, E, I, or O? E, because it's no. And then I know, because this is always the case, the subject will be S, because S is whatever is the subject of the conclusion, RP. And that tells me that S, in this case, is what? Greek poets. And that therefore P is what? Geniuses. And by a process of elimination then, M must be eccentrics. Good. All right, now I need to work out what the major premise is. No Greek poet was a genius is the conclusion, which, as it's written here, is the major premise. No Greek poet was eccentric, or geniuses are eccentric.
No Greek poet was eccentric.
Well, we've got differing opinions. What will be in the major premise?
Oh, whoops, sorry, that's what
The major term, which is geniuses. So the major premise is
All geniuses are eccentric.
geniuses are eccentric. Now, how many geniuses?
All
All. So this will be all, and what's the letter next? P. Now notice, this is an occasion where P is the subject, and that can happen. It's always going to be the predicate of the conclusion, but it might be the subject of the major premise, as it is here. All P are M. M always has to occur in the premise. That's all P are M. All right, that leaves us with what, as it's written here? What's the minus premise?
No Greek poet.
No, it's
No Greek poet was eccentric, which is no S R M. Good. That's what. That's writing this argument in standard form. One more thing. Look at part A of Practice Quiz 9.1. There you have a bunch of 3 letters and a number. That is the condensed way of writing the form of a categorical syllogism. And we'll work out what is the condensed form of this. Guess what? Notice that it's 3 letters and a number. The 3 letters we call the mood. So the mood of a categorical syllogism, categorical propositions don't have a mood. The mood is of a categorical syllogism, and it consists of 3 vowels. What do the 3 vowels represent? The different types of what? Those things.
That.
Categorical propositions. Now the order is important. Guess what the mood is of this? Exactly right. Why? Because the first letter represents the form of the major premise, the second letter represents the form of the minor premise, the third letter represents the form of the conclusion. Okay.
Oh, so it's back to A, E, like A for all is.
Right. This is A,
Okay.
all, E for no, and so on. Yes. Okay. Now, the other element, well, let's see how much we can work out with just the mood. So A and B of practice 9.1 sort of work in different directions. In part B, what you're doing is you're given an example of an argument in sort of non-standard form, in just colloquial form, the way somebody might say it. And what you have to do is put it in standard form and then work out the condensed form. We still haven't finished that. We've only got the mood, the 3 letters. We've got A, E, E, but we need the number. But before we get to what the number tells you, let's look at practice quiz 9.1a. That part works the other way around. You're given the condensed form and you're asked to expand it into something like this. Notice what the condensed form does not tell you is what it's about. It doesn't give you the content. It doesn't tell you if it's about Greek poets or bushes or trees or whatever. It just tells you the best you're going to be able to get is something like this, where the terms are represented by letters. Let's see how far we can get without knowing what the number means. So, AII we're given. What can I work out from that? I can work out the first word of the major premise. What is it? All. Good, because that's A. What is the first word of the minor premise? Some. Now, and I actually know the entire conclusion. What is the entire conclusion?
Some SRP.
Some SRP. Now, why is it that I've left blanks here, but I don't have to leave blanks here?
Because the conclusion always tells you the subject and predicate.
Right, because S is whatever is the subject of the conclusion, so it has to be S here. And P is whatever is the predicate of the conclusion. So it's always going to be S and P in that order. Now, I do know what 2 terms are going to occur in this first one. What 2 terms are going to occur in there? P and M, yes. And I know what 2 terms are going to occur in here. What? S and M. But what don't I know? Exactly. And that's what the number is going to tell me. So I can get this far with just the mood. But I don't know what goes in each of these 4 slots. And that's what the number is going to tell me. How many combinations are there? Well, I'll give it away. The number is called the figure of the categorical syllogism. And it is a number from 1 to 4. So how many combinations are there? 4. Let's work out what they could be. Here's one. It could be MP. Now notice P is always going to be on the top, and S is always going to be on the bottom. SM. We'll call that arrangement 1, or figure 1. Alternatively, we could have PMSM. We'll call that figure 2. Or we could have MPMS. That's figure 3. What does that leave as figure 4? PM, because we've only used that once, and MS, we've only used that one. Yes, that's what the number means. So, this is AII1. So what goes here? M. What goes here, everybody? Everybody? What goes here, everybody? S. What goes here? M. There you go. That's how you unpack AII1. Now, how are you going to remember what this number means? Because it's not going to be on the exam. You're going to have to remember it. There is an easy way to remember it, and it's easy because it's stupid. And the human brain is wired to remember stupid shit. It's just the way we are. Okay, here it is. It's a little smiley face. Well, that's not the important part. The important part is he's got kind of patchy hair. I can identify. Oops. It goes like that. Notice that it clumps in the middle. He's got kind of a faux hawk going on here. What does the hair represent?
Letters.
Which letters? The M's, yes. If I drew a line through the M's, it's the hair. Notice it clumps in the middle. With number 1, it's diagonally that way. With number 2, the hair is on the right. With number 3, the hair is on the left. The M's are on the left. That's slightly counterintuitive, but that's the way it is. And number 4, it goes that way. Remember that. You will, because it's stupid. Okay, that's the easy way to remember what the figure represents, just as long as you remember that the line is where the M's are. Okay? All right then. What is the figure of our Greek poets one then? Give me a number. 2. Yes, because the M's are on the right. So it is AEE2. That's what this is. Let's do some more unpacking. So finish off part A. EIO3, AEE2, and so on. What you've got to do there is take those and produce something that looks like this. Go for it. Pause. Eric. Thanks. Must be super efficient today. Some bureaucrats are not chosen on the basis of their ability, and all bureaucrats are civil servants. Therefore, some civil servants, and I've fallen asleep already. Some civil servants are not chosen on the basis of their ability. All right. What is the first thing we have to do? As always, find the conclusion. What is the conclusion of this one?
Some civil servants are chosen based on their ability.
How do you know it's this one?
This is their ability.
Because you got your nice big indicator blinking light there. That's right. So, what that tells us is that the conclusion is what type? O. Yes, it's very important that it's an O type. So the conclusion is going to be some, help me out here, S are not P. Okay, now that also tells us that S is what? In this case.
Civil servants.
What's that? Civil servants. Yes. And P is going to be something rather ugly. I mean, just kind of awkward. Well, remember, it has to be a group of things.
Things chosen on the basis of their ability.
Now, things that are chosen on the basis of their ability. Now, notice it says some civil servants are not chosen, but the not is already in the form. And you should never include a negative, well, where it's avoidable, you should never include a negative in the definition. Remember, it's silly to talk about, a set of things that are not bricks. That's just silly, unless it's the complement of something. So we want P to be defined affirmatively, and it's things chosen on the basis of their ability. Again, kind of awkward, but that's what it is. So that tells us that M must be what?
Bureaucrats.
Bureaucrats, because that's the remaining term. Bureaucrats. All right, now that we know that, what, as it's written here, is the major premise?
Some bureaucrats are not chosen on the basis of their ability.
So some bureaucrats are not chosen on the basis of their ability. How do you know that that is the major premise?
Because P's in it.
Because P is in it, things chosen on the basis of their ability. So they're both talking about things chosen on the basis of their ability. All right, how do I write that with letters?
Oh.
No, I mean, like, so it's some M, because it says bureaucrats, and bureaucrats is M, and it's are not, as you said, it's an O type, are not P. Okay, and then the minor premise, as is written is, here is what?
Bureaucrats are civil servants.
All bureaucrats are civil servants. So how do I write that?
All M or S.
All M, because it's M is bureaucrats, are S. All right, we've written it in standard form. Now we want the condensed form. Give me 3 letters and a number, and I want you to go like A4 or whatever it is. Go.
O, A, O, 3.
O, because this is an O type. A, because this is an A type. O, because this is an O type. And then the M's are both on the left, so that's type 3. Good. All right, now do that for the rest of them. Cut.